Welcome aboard the Mad Pastors Podcast. Honest pastors, honest conversations. Powered by G6 Allies. You may now feel free to move about the podcast.
Oh, welcome back to the Mad Pastors.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you guys.
It's a nice morning for coffee.
It is,
but then
indeed.
Again, every morning.
Every morning is a good morning for coffee.
We need to get personalized mugs, Michael.
Okay.
Mugs with our mugs on
With
them.
our mugs on?
Mugs. That's me.
Those are a couple. They might look better than we do.
No, maybe. He's thinner. So that's me, but that's a thinner version of me. And that's a version of Michael where he can grow hair on his face.
Well, yeah, it's a much thicker beard than what I have. So these are our idealized people.
I have that goatee.
Avatars.
I'll be honest, I don't like goatees as much, but I have them because I have all this autoimmune junk I won't go into, but I'm learning now how to lose weight. And so I've been like a balloon all my life, and I finally figured out why like a year and a half ago. And so I'm losing weight now and trying to, and don't say I'm not. You watch me every week. But this guy he's got the goatee, right? I don't know what's going to happen because I don't like my goatee. And my wife wants me to shave it, but it keeps me from having as double of a chin when I'm standing. And so it reminds me of that movie, Jeremiah Johnson with Robert Redford. When I was in middle school.
Forgot all about that movie.
It's a good movie.
That's a good one.
It's my favorite GIF where the camera zooms up on him and he goes. And so but all that to say, there's this scene, he marries this Native American girl and they're, in the frontier, I guess it's just them. That's got to be boring. But they're kissing and in these scenes and you're like, in middle school, you're like, okay, cool, kisses. And then. Gross. Then at one point, you don't get it until you're married or until you're, I guess, in high school or older. But she like touches her face and is like, ugh, and leaves. And then the next scene, he's got no beard.
Shaved. Yes.
He's just clean shaven. So. All right.
Well, if you are listening to the audio version of this entire intro made no sense to you because
it's on you.
What we're talking about is our avatars on the Mad Pastor logo.
Yeah, but you can see it on your phone. Just look at the cover.
And so if you're just listening to the audio, you're missing out. Go to YouTube and watch the videos as well.
Click
download
subscribe.
it because we want the downloads too.
Yep,
but subscribe to YouTube.
We're growing
and
this thing, man.
Look at us in all our
pudgy glory,
less than avatar splendor.
All right, you need to do that, and you need to share this with the pastors. But our whole series that we've been doing, and we're now on the 4th episode, is Unscripted. Literally a logo that if you can't see it on the audio, you're not missing much because it was.
There's not much there.
And here's why we did it. It's not because we're lazy. I mean, we spend time writing things out and doing stuff, but it's because we know how much. I mean, imagine when you go to a conference or you go and connect with other pastors, you just like talking shop. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to just talk shop for a while and do that. But we have written out a list of items that we haven't covered that we think are
topics
important.
to discuss, but there's been.
But I just reminded you because we a month ago.
We haven't looked at this list, and as we hit record, I said, Ian, what are we talking about?
We're full-time pastors, and we're full-time podcasters, and we're full-time parachurchmen, so we don't have time to remember 8 long lists.
Yeah, so this one should be fun, right? Unscripted, we are going to talk about what, Ian?
I'll see if you remember.
I don't remember. See, that's how unscripted this one's going to be.
So we're talking about how do you set up, not just set up sustainable accountability structures for pastors,
okay,
but practical, sustainable accountability structures. And what we mean by that is we see more and more pastors failing, right? Or pastors that leave the ministry. We're going to talk about, I think we should talk about the full breadth of what accountability looks like. It's not just, are you banging this person in the church? It's about, or your secretary or whatever. It's much broader than that. And the problem with the church is we don't think it's much broader than that. So how do we set up, practical and sustainable systems? Because I hear a lot, most of the time, most of these pastors that whether they're famous or they're a pastor of that is not famous, both are equally important. And we tend to go, well, wait, they had a board, they had elders, they had deacons. I mean, they had all this stuff. How is it that they failed? They had all these accountability. Well, that's because it probably was either not practical, not sustainable, or just not used.
Yeah.
So how do we even go about thinking about accountability?
I just read this morning about another pastor at a high profile church, one of the largest churches in America, that was dismissed and is facing rape charges.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking
It's not
to
Joel
see.
Osteen, is it?
No.
Thanks.
It wasn't the lead pastor; it was a staff member on one of these known churches.
And we did a couple podcasts on the SBC, sexual scandal. But it's not. I think we talk sexual because it's the most oversexed culture in history,
right?
But there is more. So how should we think about accountability?
There's all kinds of problems that we face, right? I'm known pastors who have been removed from ministry or left of their own volition out of ministry because of sexual sins.
Or pastors that sent pastors that were dealing with sins to other churches for them to find out and deal about it.
Or they left because of prescription drug use, because of gambling addictions. There's
money.
all kinds of, like embezzling, stealing money, whatever. There's all kinds of moral failings that pastors are facing and that we're seeing. And so what kind of systems do we need in place to help protect pastors, right?
Yeah,
how do we go about that?
You can't send them a questionnaire every week to fill out that's like,
are you cheating on your spouse this week? Yes or no?
Are you, if you're not married, are you sleeping with people in the church? Or are you stealing money? So how, in a culture in a culture that we're around where you can't really admit that stuff or talk about that stuff or you're afraid to, how do we foster that?
So
effectively?
We kind of joke about that, and that would not be an effective approach of giving them a survey to fill out every week.
But asking questions.
But are we asking pastors healthy questions?
Yeah.
Are we asking them how they're doing? Are we checking in on them to say, hey, I know you're carrying a lot of stress. I know you got a lot of things sitting on your plate, a lot of weight on your shoulders. How are you doing spiritually? How are you doing emotionally? Physically? How are your relationships doing? And like just checking in, not in a I'm looking for some dirt on the pastor kind of a way, right? And we've talked about that before. That you
Karen!
want to. Oh, Karen keeps making it. Karen is always there.
She always pops up.
Not in that kind of a way where you're trying to be vindictive, but with somebody or a couple of somebodies where there is an immensely high level of trust,
right,
and mutual respect that a pastor would listen to, church member Joe when Joe comes to him and says, "Hey, pastor, I've noticed a couple of things that have me concerned.
Yeah.
I don't know that you're doing okay. How can I help?" Mm-hmm. And the pastor to receive that and say, "You know what, Joe, you're right. Thank you. I'm struggling with A, B, C, and D, and I don't know what to do with it." We need those kinds of things in place.
And I don't know if it's fair to say, but let me ask you this question: if somebody, and I would always say this. I think people say this, and we say it as a way to get out of it, and we shouldn't. Like a way to just kind of dismiss going further with it, but I believe that if somebody wants to do something illegal or immoral or wrong, they're going to find a way to do it. But I don't think that is 90% of pastors that do it. Now, I don't have any hard research evidence, but I have practical experience in just life in general saying, we get to that point. Normally, we get to that point because there's maybe it's not as high as 90%, but I think the majority of pastors that fall into that, it's what you said. It's a self-medication. Some people feel self-medicated by stealing money and gambling. Some people feel self-medicated by, and so like one example, at least a gleaming one in my ministry career, was that I was on the executive team of a church that was large and growing and very big, and it's, when you grow, it's a great thing, but it also has a lot of negative things to it as well. Like, though he has had issues in the past, I think it's worth quoting. Bill Hybels would say, the faster your growth, the more exponential your growth, the more exponential your problems. And I think that was a good point. And so this pastor, he had a vision team, is what we called it, where it was a board. They did have good structures in place, voting. There was, to have a quorum or whatever, you always had to have a certain number of vision team members there. They had to be voted on. All that stuff. And they would meet. Now, interestingly enough, never with the executive team, which out of maybe 25 staff members, 5 of us were on the executive team, and we all ran major ministries. And we'd always meet with the executive pastor and the head pastor, and then the head pastor and executive pastor would go meet with the board, but we never connected. And we find out that for about 3 years, this pastor had been either starting, fostering, or in multiple affairs. And I believe 3 is what I was told. And then you ask the question, what happened? And then the guy that follows him up doesn't have affairs, but he starts hiding money, not stealing it, but like the church was doing poorly, and so he was kind of fudging financial reports and making it look like it was better than it was as he was trying to work down the scenes, and staff members were leaving, and then everybody goes, well, what's going on? And that church still 7 or 8 years later is in major turmoil.
Still reeling from the
they hire bad people.
Sure.
because they hired a bad lead pastor that about ran them out in 2 years because of all this stuff. And my question is, okay, I mean, I know from the inside of that situation, here's what happened. The guy that preached community from the stage over and over and over again was never in a community group. He never had people around him. I know now that he would have smoke screens with other people, and he would lead in such a way where he never really had to be accountable to that group of men. And those group of men, some of them served in my ministries, and they won't even look at me when I've seen them again, because I think there's a fair amount of shame that they knew they were supposed to keep him accountable, and they didn't. Mm-hmm. So how do we, I mean, that guy did some amazing things in his church. He impacted me in a huge way. But when we look at how do we set up a sustainable and practical mode of accountability, I mean, how do we even go about doing that?
I mean, the first step in it is having a pastor who is humble enough to submit himself to accountability.
Right.
And that's part of the problem that we see, and that's part of why we're seeing so many moral failings and people leaving ministry, is because they've never had that. Yeah. They've been too arrogant, too pompous, too convinced that they are always right, to be willing to have a group of people around them that are more than just yes men, that are going to come around them and say, hey, Ian, slow down. Right. Ian, you're not spending enough time on this. Ian, I'm concerned for you about this. Yeah. That doesn't exist because I'm the pastor. You just need to do what I say. Sure. Oh, well, if the pastor says it, then that's what we're going to do. And there's no accountability in that mindset. So that's the first step. We got to get pastors to a point where they're willing to accept accountability and be able to receive feedback from people around them.
What about the idea? Would the step 2 be building a culture and care? I mean, you don't want to you want to choose elders or accountability people carefully, but you don't want to say that I'm choosing them like they're yes men. But all that to say, I think some of it is, we talked about sacred cows last time. Are we building a sacred cow in our church that is grace driven? I mean, some of it I think is shame and reprisals. I mean, if what if a pastor says, I mean, and part of that is such a legalism that pastors aren't allowed to struggle. What if a pastor says, right, man, I'm having a hard time with pornography because I'm struggling with lust, or, I'm really tempted for the affair of my wife, or, I'm going to be honest, guys, my heart is really tinging towards trying to figure out how to get more money. Most pastors that say that, they'd be removed. Yeah,
they lose their voice. I mean, if they're not removed from their job, then they lose their voice. And so no one's going to listen to their sermon on Sunday because the whole time they're going to be thinking, well, this guy is a porn addict. I can't listen to, he shouldn't be teaching God's word. And they don't hear a thing from God's word.
And they shouldn't read Paul or anybody else.
Yeah, I think there definitely needs to be that side of it as well. So the pastor needs to be willing to embrace accountability, and there needs to be a culture of grace and of trust built on the other side as well. And I think one cool way of doing that is, and I've seen it called different things, but a pastor relations committee or team where there is a group of very trusted, very spiritually mature men and women, mostly men for men pastors, because you don't want to cross those gender issues. But this is a team of people They are not part of your elder team, or your deacons.
They don't need to
they're
have
not
power
part of
over
that leadership role, but they are your advocate.
Right.
Their job is to meet with you regularly, to just let you vent, to let you talk about your spiritual well-being, your personal spiritual well-being, not how the church is doing, and it's how are you doing. Vent out some frustrations in extreme confidence, and talk through, here's what I'm struggling with, here's what I'm wrestling with, get some more objective feedback on what's going on. And it's just a safe place for a pastor to go and to vent and to talk through the struggles that he's facing. And so and then that team, they advocate for the pastor when need be. So if there's a conflict between your elder team and your pastor, this team of advocates, it's not like they're your hatchet men coming along to support the pastor. Here comes the pastor with his posse of yes men. They are then having a conversation with the board that's probably a little less emotionally charged, because as a pastor, it becomes a personal attack,
it's your
right?
life.
It's and so this team can be a little more objective in it and have a healthier conversation, and can convey the pastor's heart without having to be super guarded on what I can and can't say. And it just is a healthy way of doing that. And so it's just kind of an advocacy board.
I wonder too we say this about pastors need to be humble. I would also say leaders need to be humble. There is this mentality. I think you have to fight, whether it be transparency or even how you judge the character of people too, that those who are on an elder board, or those, whether an elder or vision board, but I don't care what you call it. I'm not a big fan of lay elders, not because I don't like the system, because they've always been abused when they're called lay elders. In my experience, they're not all the way. So, but I do, biblically, elders are great, or a board or whatever you have. The other side of it is, though, most of the time, the environment, we got to be careful, because the environment we foster is that, well, if you're on this board, you're in the special elite few. And if you're this pastor, and the point of an elder is to be an overseer and to be a steward and a guardian of those underneath them, not to be a king and a ruler. And so I think we run into that. And I watched this. I know why the pastor where we were at failed in that particular church, is because of the immense, just palpable level of arrogance that I dealt with a lot of those guys. And they used them sometimes as hatchet men, but largely they all felt special, and they all had their own agendas. And I think that the whole point of a board of overseers is to not only help guide and protect the church, but it's also to help protect pastors from themselves, not rule them. And so I wonder how, I guarantee you the conversations never happened where they said, hey, let's just call him John. Hey, John, you say that we are a church of small groups and that we're a church of community, but you're not in one. And we love you. I mean, it doesn't need to be, you need to do this. That's what it turns into. But we love you. But we can't preach one thing to people and not do it. And if we're preaching it, we know it's right. So now you're not doing what we know is right.
Right.
I mean, to see that kind of thing change and to say, listen, can we talk? It seems like your marriage is strained because we've paid attention. What's going on? Do we need to send you? You've been here 15 years. Do we need to send you on a sabbatical? That would have maybe been a helpful thing.
Right.
But between the arrogance on both sides, but I even think, we tend to lean on tools as solutions, and tools aren't solutions. They are tools to get you where you need to go. I mean, you can give me a jigsaw and a piece of wood, but if I don't know how to cut it out, it's kind of worthless.
Right.
And so, I mean, I think
you're going to lose a finger or two.
Thing like that. But I think things like covenant eyes are helpful tools. And we need to have, I would think about, have that pastor, if he can share with you, hey, I struggle in these areas. Okay, let's get tools to help, but nothing. So it's just like learning how to cut with that saw. If you're not setting up a sustainable, meaning it is continually happening, you don't want to be legalistic, but I think most of us are not erring on the side of legalism. We're erring on the side of slothfulness and laziness to not do what we should do. And so has our pastor, and maybe do we need to fight as a lay leader or as a pastor for that system where there is transparency and honesty and care? I think the idea of a pastoral advocacy group is really interesting. I've never heard that. But I do. I mean, you look at the culture and honestly, if you lead this way as a pastor, whether it's volunteers and people underneath you, or you're a staff and you have staff members underneath you, that is contagious. It helps. And I mean, I don't think we use 1 Corinthians very well and think about it very often. We love the fact that God works in our weakness because we just want to be strong. But the truth is, the weaker we allow ourselves to be, the more strongly and the more strength God uses in us. And I don't think we see that. I mean, that's a subversive concept. So accountability, man. And accountability, it ranges not just sex, not just alcohol, or not just substance abuse. I mean, it ranges everything. Anything that we would do to compromise who we are in order to help either medicate or fill some type of idolatry or desire in us, right?
And it's not always, I mean, it goes beyond self-medication too. Sometimes it's, especially in relationships, it's just the stress of ministry or of finances or of, that burr in the saddle person that attends your church or whatever it is, that sometimes it is just so much on you that you take it out on your spouse or on your kids, and those relationships get strained, right? And so we come home from work every day. We've been at work where we've been counseling people, we've been praying with people, we've been planning out ministries, and then we come home and we yell at our spouse. Right. And that's not healthy. Sure. And so we need to make sure that we're putting things in place to help with that. And I would say if you're a pastor, one, the primary takeaway from this episode for you as a pastor is be willing to be held accountable. Yeah. Don't think of yourself as more than you really are, because you're not. You are not good enough to do your job. You are not talented enough to do all that God has called you to do. Just accept that and realize He has not called you to do it by yourself. And if you're watching this as a pastor and that's you, show this to your board of people, and your board or your elders or whatever you call it needs to understand that you're also not the lead pastor, and your job isn't to critique them every time they make a decision. Your job is to help them be healthy and hold them accountable and connect with them. If you're a lay leader or an elder or a church member or whatever watching this, then my encouragement to you would be, one, pray for your pastor. Right. Make sure you're doing that regularly. Don't pray that God makes them agree with you. Yes. Pray for their... You're not praying down fire on them. You're not, yes, God, please make him change his mind to agree with me. You need to be praying for him. Two, you need to be asking your pastor how you can pray for him. Yeah. And don't get pushy with it, but also don't settle for the, oh, thanks, just pray that I can keep leading well kind of answers, right? Yeah. Like that's not real. I mean, you want to pray for that, but that's not being honest and giving real concern. So pastors, share some real things that you want your people to pray for you about. And don't expect it to happen right away. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Relationships grow. Building that trust takes time, right? Yeah. And so that's ultimately, we can put all these structures and these, very programmatic type organizational charts and accountability boards and pastoral relations committees. Tools are only as good as how you use them. But at the end of the day, it comes down to trust between people. And so do what you can to build that trust and put yourself, pastors, you are going to be in a much better place down the road. It may be uncomfortable at times because nobody likes being told, hey, I think you need to fix this. I think you need to work on this. And I see you struggling here. Yeah. We don't like to hear that, right? And elders and people need to tell you more than just that. Yeah. So let's balance it a little bit too. We don't want to create structures just for creating structures. The whole point is to help pastors be better and to help pastors grow and be healthy so that they're leading healthy churches. And that requires everybody to participate in their own way. So I agree with that. I wonder if, to what extent, not that I'm down, I think they're great tools, but I do wonder if we were doing these things correctly and actually just developing relationships, all those tools seem like a supplement for us to not be developing that. So honestly, you probably need less tools the more you effectively build relationships and honesty. So, man, I'm excited. This is a good episode. So may your coffee stay hot. And your ministry stay healthy.
and stay accountable.
Stay accountable.
All right, listen, we love
you
y'all.
guys.
See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Pastors Podcast. Mad Pastors is powered by G6 Allies, who knows that healthy ministry means having the right team behind you to provide worthwhile tools so ministry doesn't destroy you. If you'd like to partner with G6 Allies, here's a couple of ways you can do it. One, you can rate, subscribe, and review this podcast so that as many people as possible can get the same help and encouragement that you're receiving. You can also visit g6allies.com/partner to see how you can financially partner with us. G6 Allies is dependent on viewers and listeners like you to support our ministry across the nation. If you have any questions or would like to contact the Mad Pastors for any reason, you can contact us at hello@g6allies.com. We'd love to hear from you.